Hi, welcome to Prime Recap. A paleontologist develops a type of time machine that takes him to a new dimension, and in order to return home, he and his friends will have to deal with a monstrous tyrannosaurs and an army of aliens. Today we will recap the story of the 2009 movie, Land of the Lost. In an alternate dimension, a group of astronauts land on a planet that looks a lot like Earth, only millions of years ago. While exploring the place, one of the astronauts sees on his GPS that the coordinates matched New Mexico in the United States, but with a completely different biome. Suddenly, the astronaut hears the roar of a dinosaur and starts running desperately through the forest while trying to radio for help, but no one answers and he ends up being devoured by a colossal tyrannosaur. On Earth, a biologist named Dr. Rick Marshall, who is developing studies on quantum paleontology, goes on a talk show to present his research. According to Rick, in the future we will experience an absurd fuel crisis, and to solve this, instead of studying renewable biofuels, he suggests that time travel would be the ideal solution. Incredulous, the host starts asking questions about the work, but when Marshall lets slip that he has spent $50 million from the public coffers on his research, the host starts accusing him of irresponsibility. After Rick finishes presenting his work, the host comments on the scientists who criticize this hypothesis and tells that Stephen Hawking ridiculed the study. Since he has asked the producers not to touch this subject, Marshall leaves the studio quite angry, but returns a few seconds later when the host starts ridiculing him. After the disastrous interview, Rick lost all his prestige and became a laughingstock to everyone in the scientific academy, and was forced to spend the next 3 years teaching children. After being humiliated by his own students in yet another class, Rick is visited by Holly, a former college student who also studied quantum paleontology at Cambridge. When she meets the doctor, Ellie asks about advances in research on tachyons, particles that move so fast they can travel through time, and Rick replies that he was building the tachyon controller but gave up after the interview. To convince him to come back with the research, Holly shows that she went to the desert where she found a rock over 265 million years old with a fossilized lighter, along with a crystal that can radiate tachyon energy. After Holly leaves, Rick takes the lighter from his pocket and realizes that it fits the fossil perfectly, but he can't believe his eyes. The next morning, Holly goes to pay the doctor another visit and finds the messy lab and Marshall completely exhausted, but with the tachyon's amplifier finally finished. Since there is only one test left, Holly decides to take the professor to the Devil's Cave, the place where he found the fossil, to finish this last step. When they arrive in the middle of the desert, they go to Will's store and ask him to be their guide for the cave tour. After negotiating, the scientists climb into the dinghy and begin to navigate the place while Will tells them that the cave is thousands of years old and that there have been reports of reptilian sightings there since the time of colonization. While exploring the place, Marshall's tachyon sensor starts picking up particles in the air and they decide to turn on the amplifier. At that moment, the readers go off and an earthquake starts to happen, knocking the device into the water. Suddenly, the earthquake causes an extremely strong torrent that carries the raft through the cave, until they arrive at a large waterfall that drops straight into an interdimensional portal. On the other side, the trio wakes up in the middle of the desert dunes in a Viking ship that has been hit by a World War II-era plane, which means that the timelines in this dimension are completely messed up. To prove to everyone that his theory was right, Rick asks Holly to start recording while he walks around the place and explains more about his research, but while they make the documentary, Will is more concerned about how they will get home now that the amplifier is lost. At that moment, the trio begins to hear a strange sound and they run in the direction of the noise, where they find two of Chewbacca's cousins trying to eliminate a third. When she sees the scene, Holly refuses to let this happen and catches the attention of the primates who advance toward them. To drive them away, Will grabs a lighter and tries to use it to intimidate them, but because he is completely stupid, he burns his own finger and drops it. Then the two primates pick up the lighter from the ground and run back to the tribe with the fire, one of the greatest advances for civilization. After they walk away, Holly walks up to the mutant chimpanzee that was going to be sacrificed and uses her knowledge of primatology to communicate with him, discovering that his name is Chaka. Trying to help, Rick approaches and asks to see the bruise on his ankle, but Chaka is startled by the pain and begins to run away as the trio chases after him, but the ground beneath them gives way and they all fall straight into a pile of bones. Thinking that this was a trap set by Chaka, Marshall starts to fight with him until Holly manages to calm them down, but suddenly some vines get tangled in their legs and leave them hanging more than 10 meters high. From above, Rick sees the astronauts' clothes and realizes that this is a feeding area, meaning that if they just wait, they will soon be devoured by the creature that lives there. With this in mind, the four hold hands and start swinging themselves trying to hold onto the tree, but while they are doing the pendulum movement, a colossal T-Rex appears and almost swallows the professor's hand, but ends up hitting right into the vine, which breaks and knocks them all down. Taking advantage of the Tyrannosaurus getting its mouth stuck, the quartet desperately run out of the cave and almost manage to lose the animal, but in their stupid idea to prove that this really happened, they stop halfway and Will asks to pose for a picture while the T-Rex is behind him. After almost being devoured to make the picture, they find Chaka crossing a bridge and run across it too. When they reach the other side, instead of continuing to run away, the four of them stop to watch the T-Rex afraid to cross, but after it gives up, Marshall begins to belittle the animal's intelligence and all other senses, saying that its brain is the size of a walnut. Feeling offended, the Tyrannosaurus turns around and rushes at them, leaping over the abyss. Desperate, the four flee to a cave where the dinosaur cannot reach them, but still, the creature continues to stare at Rick, making it very clear that it has now become something personal. After realizing that they will not leave, the Tyrannosaur retreats and the group starts to discuss whether they should make camp in this cave or not, but while they are talking, a song starts to play and they follow the sound, finding a record player next to the skeleton of some World War II military personnel. After this find, they decide to settle there and set up for the night, but before they go to sleep, Rick says that he doesn't want Chaka to sleep in the cave, because he thinks he is some kind of criminal and that possibly this was the reason he would be eliminated in the desert. Holly then begins to ask questions and discovers that Chaka is the prince of the village, but that some of his subjects have conspired against him to take the throne. After Chaka tells his story, Will and Rick start to discuss how to deal with the dinosaur, but while they are talking, the ground shakes again and they leave the cave to see what it is all about, finding a colossal nut at the entrance, another message from the T-Rex to show that Marshall was wrong. The next morning, the professor wakes up and starts recording a kind of log when Chaka and Will arrive bringing some fruit for them to eat, but when Rick opens the object, hundreds of ants come out and start walking around the biologist's body, but Chaka devours them in an instant. At that moment, a beam of light comes from the forest along with a thunderous sound. Not knowing what is happening, the group goes to the cave entrance where they see an object emitting a plasma discharge from the middle of the trees. While the others try to figure out what that is, Rick begins to get headaches while hallucinating about an alien lying begging for help. Thinking it has something to do with the lights, Rick starts running into the beams of light and finds a tribal structure with a giant, transparent crystal right in the center. As it gets closer, the group begins to feel the tachyon radiation just like in the cave, which means that the amplifier may be nearby. Curious, they approach the crystal and begin to touch it, but Chaka appears and tries desperately to tell them something, but none of them can understand. At that moment, dozens of Sleestaks, a race of reptilians, come out of the rock crevices with several jaws ready to devour them. To try to defend herself, Holly takes off her belt and prepares for combat, but Rick sees the light reflecting off the object and has the idea of directing the rays right into the eyes of the statues. In this way, the light reflects off the eyeballs of the statues until they hit the crystal, turning it into a kind of portal that takes them to another dimension where the Sleestaks cannot reach them. In this place, the trio meets that alien from Marshall's hallucination and he introduces himself as Enoch, a being from another dimension who is lost on this earth, and who needs the professor's help in order to return to his planet and save the entire universe. Feeling like a failure, Rick says that there must be some mistake, but Enoch replies that he brought them to this dimension precisely because he needs Rick's help to deal with Zarn, the leader of the Sleestaks, who intends to use the power of the tachyon particles to conquer the universe. According to Enoch, Zarn has used the crystals to take over his home planet, and if Rick doesn't help him, he will soon go to Earth to conquer the entire human race. Enoch goes on to say that the only thing missing for Zarn to complete his goal is a device capable of amplifying tachyon's radiation, which is exactly what Rick Marshall has built. The alien then says that they must find the amplifier and bring it back so that he can send them home to defeat Zarn. When they are leaving to find the device, Will says that he finds it suspicious and that they should not trust the alien, but is completely ignored by the rest of the group. In a race to find the amplifier before Zarn does, the group returns to the forest and begins to devise a plan to pick up the device's signals, but Chaka finds them and asks them to follow him. After a few miles of forest, the quartet arrives at a sandy terrain full of human creations and small dinosaurs. Watching the animals, the group realizes that the dinghy is in that place and Rick assumes that the amplifier is also nearby. While they search for the object, the small animals start crowding around the dinghy until an ice cream truck falls from the sky. Rick realizes that the dinosaurs have learned that this is where the food is coming from and tells everyone to run away before the big ones arrive, but it is too late. A group of dinosaurs with bigger size arrives and begins to completely destroy the truck, as well as dismembering the ice cream man. Taking advantage of the distraction, Rick once again tells them to get out of there, but another dinosaur arrives, only this time it's the T-Rex itself. At that moment, a colossal Allosaurus appears and Marshall celebrates, thinking that they will fight, giving them the opportunity to escape. But because they are unlucky, the two dinosaurs just stare at each other and turn to the humans, starting a hunt in the desert. After everyone splits up, Rick starts running in a zigzag pattern trying to confuse the Tyrannosaurus, but the animal manages to catch him with extreme ease, leaving his backpack in pieces. When he touches the ground, Rick keeps trying to escape, but is cornered by the two predators who are hunting in pairs. Out of options, the man goes to a completely destroyed clothing store and hides among the mannequins, but the Tyrannosaurus manages to find him and begins his meal while Holly records everything, but Rick shouts from afar that he is safe. Luckily, the animal has caught a mannequin. Cornered, Marshall runs into a limousine trying to hide, but the dinosaurs manage to find him and start trampling the vehicle, forcing the man to flee while they are distracted. Rick then runs to a mountain where he finds several of those prehistoric lizards going through the garbage, and while watching them, he sees a cylinder of liquid nitrogen and gets an idea. The man decides to run towards the rest of the group while shouting for them to get the catapult ready. When he finally reaches them, Rick places the cylinder in the catapult and Holly fires, hitting the object inside the animal's mouth. At that moment, the Allosaurus begins to freeze from the inside out and falls to the ground already lifeless, but the gases begin to expand and stew, causing the animal to explode into 1,000 pieces. Along with the debris, the tachyon amplifier also falls to the ground and Rick rushes to try to pick it up, but a giant pterosaur appears and carries the device away, ending their hope. Extremely discouraged, Marshall gives up on everything and decides to stay in an abandoned car waiting for the end, but Holly manages to convince him to continue for the sake of the research. During the night, Rick goes to them with a banjo and begins to play a song as a way of apologizing, but as he sings, a mosquito the size of a hand appears and begins to suck all the blood from his neck, leaving him completely pale and exhausted. As he continues playing, the stilt goes to his back and continues sucking all the blood, getting even more colossal and making the man faint, completely anemic. The next morning, Rick wakes up very motivated and they go out to look for the pterodactyl's nest, finding it in the crater of a volcano covered by a glass of magma. Since Will and Chaka refuse to go, the professor decides he will retrieve the amplifier, but Holly says he must be careful with the eggs, as even a small temperature difference can cause them to hatch. After the warning, Rick gets ready and starts walking calmly through the magma glass until he reaches the amplifier, but as soon as he touches the object, the eggs start hatching and the babies start crying, getting the mother's attention. To make them quiet, Rick starts a lullaby and slowly walks back to the group while putting everyone to sleep. With the amplifier recovered, they go to a hotel in the middle of the desert and start celebrating by the pool while Holly does some repairs to the device. After finishing the adjustments, she walks away and turns on the amplifier, opening one more of those portals that lead to another dimension. Inside, Holly finds a cave with several crystals and some dinosaur eggs, but suddenly a hologram from Zarn tells her that Enoch has escaped from prison and has all the tachyon crystals he needs to conquer the universe, but he still needs the amplifier. Will was right all along. After the hologram ends, Holly sees that the images were being projected from a crystal in a skeleton's hand and automatically understands that that is Zarn, but she ends up being captured before she can even warn the others. Sometime later, the boys wake up and realize that Holly has disappeared, but they see the portal and decide to go inside to try to find her. In the cave, Rick and Will stay hidden while the sentries watch the place, but when he sees two of them swapping skins, they decide to camouflage themselves and so they can finally advance to the Sleestaks court. While undercover, they see Holly about to be eliminated and Rick has the bright idea to drop the disguise and reveal his true identity. At this point, the leader of the reptilians tells him that Enoch is a criminal guilty of exterminating a civilization and says that Holly was caught trying to help him. When Marshall learns of this, he finally realizes that he has been tricked, but instead of teaming up with the reptilians to stop Enoch, he and will throw all the Sleestaks into the lava pit, thus finally being able to free Holly. Finally free, the girl says that they should take advantage of the element of surprise to defeat Enoch, but Will orders Chaka to call him before they enter. At this point, the villain, who dominated the Sleestaks thanks to the amplifier, appears and says that as a way of saying thank you, he will invade the Earth and give all the scientific credit to Rick for helping him. After ridiculing Marshall, Enoch leaves just as the Tyrannosaur finds them, but instead of running away as he always has, Rick decides that he will face him alone and sends the rest of the group away, but before he goes, Will hands him a bag of fireworks he was hiding. With everything ready for battle, Marshall takes the bamboo staff from one of the Sleestaks and prepares to attack, but realizing that this will not be enough, he decides to go to Plan B and runs to the bag of fireworks. Rick then takes a bomb and lights it with his lighter, but the explosive fails miserably. Frustrated, Marshall throws the two objects on the floor and the dinosaur steps on the lighter, forming exactly the fossil that Holly brought to him before it all happened. Ready for all or nothing, Rick decides to go to Plan C and gets his stick back. With the object in hand, he runs to the T-Rex and jumps towards the animal, but is easily devoured. Desperate, Holly comes out of hiding and begins to lecture the dinosaur, but he apparently ignores her and leaves. After this, she decides that she will show Professor Marshall's research to the world and goes to the Sleestaks army to defeat them with her powerful belt, but she is soon captured and both Will and Chaka must try to save her. Still, they are outnumbered and are easily cornered by the army of reptilians, but just as the trio is about to be eliminated, Marshall arrives riding the Tyrannosaurus, who begins to sweep the reptilians away, finishing them off one after another. After this, Marshall gets off his prehistoric mount and meets up with his friends who are curious to know how he came back, but when the professor refuses to talk about it, they immediately assume that Rick was expelled in a very disgusting way. He then explains that while he was in the T-Rex's stomach, he must have solved some intestinal problem that made the dinosaur much calmer and that settled everything between them. After this very nasty conversation, the quartet enters the crystal and finds Enoch opening a portal to Earth. To try to stop him, Rick goes to the reptilian and starts fighting, but while they are on the floor, Will climbs on top of the table with the crystals and tries a wrestling move that fails miserably, but due to his weight, the table tilts and one of the tachyon objects falls to the floor, shattering with the fall. At this point, Enoch says that because of this, the portal will close forever, and Rick has the idea of using the crystal that Holly found to keep the passage open. They then take advantage that the mutant crocodile is on the ground and run toward the portal, but Enoch holds Will's leg to stop them from leaving. Chaka then decides to help, and together they manage to immobilize the villain. Finally, Will tells them to move on and that he will stay because he feels this is his home. Respecting his decision, Holly and Marshall say goodbye and depart back to Earth, leaving Will and Chaka to live in the primate tribe. Back on our planet, the couple hug each other emotionally, and together they expose to the world everything they have recorded, thus managing to prove that their theory about tachyons was correct all along. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.